Every 90 seconds, an adult vanishes in the United States. Some are victims of crime. Others simply walk away, escaping something the world may never fully understand. In the small town of Mauston, Wisconsin, the year was 19. A mother of 4, 30-year-old Audrey Backberg, kissed her children goodbye and promised to be home before dinner. She was heading to the nearby town of Baraboo to pick up a paycheck. It was a short trip, one she'd made dozens of times before. But that evening, Audrey never returned. She simply vanished. No witnesses, no signs of struggle, no goodbyes. Just gone. Her car was found abandoned in a parking lot. Her paycheck was never picked up. Her 4 children left wondering why their mother never came home. Her mother left with more questions than answers, and a small town, gripped by rumors, suspicion, and the growing fear that something sinister had occurred. Police launched a search. Family members combed through Audrey's belongings, desperate for any sign, any clue. Theories flew. Did she run away? Was she abducted? Did someone close to her know more than they were saying? But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into years, Audrey Backberg's disappearance became a cold case. For 18 long years, the mystery festered in silence. Until one day, a break in the case, a forgotten detail, a determined detective, and a shocking discovery that would rewrite everything her family believed to be true. This isn't just the story of a missing person. It's a story about what drives a mother to disappear, about secrets buried beneath the surface of small-town America, about survival, shame, and the difficult choices made behind closed doors. Because when the truth finally surfaced, it turned out that Audrey hadn't been taken, murdered, or lost. She had been hiding in plain sight. Why did she leave? How did she stay hidden for nearly 2 decades? And what happens when the people you left behind finally find you? This is the 18-year mystery of Audrey Backberg, a mother, a disappearance, and a secret no one saw coming. 18-year mystery, a mother's mysterious disappearance. Revealed. The early 1960s were a different time. America was in the middle of a cultural shift, caught somewhere between the post-war ideal of white picket fences and the rising undercurrent of social unrest. But in the quiet Midwestern town of Mauston, Wisconsin, those national headlines felt a world away. Nestled among farmlands and narrow, tree-lined streets, Mauston was the kind of place where everyone knew each other. Neighbors waved, children played freely until the sun went down, and women, especially mothers, were expected to stay home, raise children, and support their husband. It was in this setting that Audrey Marie Backberg was trying to build her life. She was 30 years old, a mother of 4. Audrey had married young, as many women did at the time, and quickly stepped into the role of homemaker. Her husband, Ronald Backberg, was a working man, hard-nosed, traditional, and according to some accounts difficult to live with. From the outside, their life seemed typical. Church on Sundays, family dinners, children running around the small, modest home. But behind closed doors, things weren't so simple. Whispers in the community spoke of tension in the Backberg household. Audrey's friends, what few she had, described her as quiet, anxious, and always watching the clock. She rarely lingered in conversation. She never spoke ill of her husband, but she never smiled when his name came up either. In the summer of 1961, Audrey filed a police report against Ronald. It was brief, 1 page, typed and signed. It alleged physical abuse repeated, escalate. One section noted that Ronald had threatened to make her disappear if she ever tried to leave him. But in those days, especially in small towns like Mauston, domestic violence wasn't treated as a priority. The police filed the report and moved. Audrey, without much support, stayed in the home. It was safer than the alternative. At least, that's what she might have told herself. But something was changing. Audrey had recently started working part-time in Baraboo, a neighboring town just 20 miles away. It was a small clerical job, but it meant independence, something she hadn't had in years. Every Thursday, she traveled alone to collect her paycheck. For many women, that trip might have felt routine. For Audrey, it may have been her only freedom. July 7th, 19. Audrey told Ronald and the children she'd be heading to Baraboo after lunch to pick up her pay. She said she'd be back before dinner, that they'd cook something nice together. She kissed her youngest daughter on the head, told the boys to play nice, and then she walked out the front door. That was the last time anyone in her family saw her. The hours passed, then a day, then two. At first, Ronald claimed she must have gotten delayed. But when Sunday arrived, and she still hadn't returned, the story changed. Ronald reported her missing to police, telling them she had been acting strange lately, and that she had probably run off. He offered no theories beyond that, no urgency, no grief. When investigators checked with Audrey's employer, they discovered she never picked up her paycheck. More alarmingly, her purse, the same one she always carried, was found at a Greyhound bus depot, abandoned, with no identification inside. Her car remained parked near her workplace. There were no witnesses, no calls, no letters, just absence. The town buzzed with theories. Some believed Audrey had been abducted, that perhaps something sinister had happened on her way home. Others suggested she may have taken her own life, though no body was ever found. Still others whispered about Ronald, his temper, his pride, the way he carried himself at her funeral, which never actually happened, because without a body, there was no confirmation of death, just the unbearable weight of not knowing. Audrey's children, ages 3 to 11, were raised by Ronald. Her name became a ghost in the household. No photographs, no stories, no explanations, just a void. Her mother, Hazel, never gave up. For years, Hazel made weekly calls to police departments, wrote letters to newspapers, and clipped every article that mentioned her daughter's name. She swore Audrey would never abandon her children, not unless something terrible had happened. But the leads ran dry. The media moved on, and the years passed. By 1975, Audrey's name was all but forgotten, a faded case file gathering dust in a cabinet drawer. But trauma doesn't vanish with time. It only burrows deeper. Audrey's children carried the loss in silence. The unanswered questions became part of their identity. Every birthday, every holiday, every family milestone came with an unspoken ache. Why did she leave? Was she still out there? And if she was, why hadn't she come back? B-roll, empty chairs at a dinner table, a child looking out a window, an aging mother staring at a telephone. Sometimes, the past doesn't stay buried forever. Sometimes, a story refuses to end. And sometimes, the truth returns when you least expect it. In a missing person case, the first 48 hours are critical. Every hour that passes without answers makes the trail colder, the evidence more fragile, and the outcome less likely to end in resolution. But when Audrey Berg disappeared on July 7, 1961, time wasn't the only enemy. There was something else working against her, something just as damaging: indifference. When Audrey's husband, Ronald Berg, reported her missing 2 days after she vanished, the local police response was lukewarm at best. He told the officers she had left on Friday to pick up her paycheck in Baraboo and hadn't returned. There was no urgency in his voice, no panic in his demeanor. According to reports, he seemed more annoyed than alarmed. At the time, police chalked it up to a domestic walkaway. In the early 1960s, women, especially those who left their families, were often treated as deserters, not victims. The idea that a mother could leave her children willingly was unthinkable to some, and all too believable to others. Local authorities took down the information, made a few phone calls to Baraboo, and told Ronald they'd keep an eye out. But as the hours turned into days, and Audrey still didn't return, a few details began to raise red flags. When police checked with Audrey's employer, they confirmed she never picked up her paycheck. This alone was suspicious. In her entire time working there, she'd never missed a payday. Her car was found parked several blocks away, not in its usual spot. Inside were her keys, but no purse. Later, investigators discovered the purse had been found at a Greyhound station, empty, with the ID removed. There was no indication of a robbery, but it was strange. Why abandon her belongings and not take the check? Officers questioned employees at the depot. One claimed to have seen a woman matching Audrey's description walking toward the station late that Friday afternoon. She was alone, not in distress, just quiet. No one saw her board a bus. Others came forward with conflicting reports. One man said he saw Audrey in a diner outside town that same evening. Another claimed she was on the road hitchhiking west. But none of these tips were confirmed. Soon, police had a mystery on their hands, but no clear path forward. Meanwhile, Ronald's behavior grew stranger. According to neighbors, he didn't seem particularly shaken. In fact, just days after Audrey's disappearance, He burned several of her belongings in a backyard fire pit. A neighbor recalled seeing him throw a photo album and a stack of letters into the flames. When asked about it by police, Ronald claimed he was cleaning up. Officers didn't press the issue. Audrey's mother, Hazel, was furious. She insisted that her daughter would never abandon her children, that something had happened to her, and that Ronald knew more than he was letting on, but her pleas were largely ignored. Hazel begged the department to open a criminal investigation. Instead, the file remained classified as a voluntary disappearance. The truth is, missing adult cases in the 1960s were almost impossible to pursue without a crime scene, a witness, or a body. There were no national databases, no centralized coordination. If someone left town and wanted to disappear, it wasn't hard to do, especially if you were a woman without power or protection. Still, Hazel persisted. She placed ads in regional newspapers. She called every hospital, shelter, and church within a 100-mile radius. She even contacted the FBI, but was told Audrey didn't meet the criteria for federal involvement. Months passed. The case faded from headlines, and with no new leads, the file was pushed to the back of a drawer. Despite the silence from law enforcement, theories continued to swirl around Mauston. Some locals believed Audrey had met with foul play, that perhaps she had been abducted or killed, her body dumped somewhere remote. Others suspected Ronald, especially after his cold response and history of domestic abuse. But there was no evidence, no confession, no witnesses, and so the whispers stayed whispers. Then there were others, fewer, but vocal, who believed Audrey had planned her escape, that the purse at the Greyhound station, the unclaimed paycheck, and the car's unusual location were all part of a deliberate disappearance. They speculated she had changed her name, crossed state lines, and started over somewhere new, maybe with help, maybe with another man, maybe just to survive. For Audrey's children, now being raised by Ronald, the silence was a wound that never healed. Audrey's absence left more than just an empty chair at the table. It left questions that seeped into every part of her children's lives. Why did she leave? Did she love us? Was it something we did? They weren't allowed to talk about her. Ronald refused to answer questions. Her name became taboo. One of the children in a later interview would say, "It felt like she died, but no one told us how." School counselors were called in, but back then there wasn't a roadmap for this kind of trauma. Audrey's youngest daughter, just 3 at the time of the disappearance, barely remembered her mother's voice. Her oldest son, 11 when she vanished, took on the role of protector, suppressing his own grief to shield his siblings from theirs. Hazel remained the only adult in their lives, still holding on to hope. Every birthday she mailed a card to the last known address, just in case. Every Christmas she lit a candle in her window. For nearly 2 decades, she kept her daughter's memory alive, even when the world had moved on. By the early 1970s, the Backerberg file sat untouched. Most of the original investigators had either retired or transferred. The few who remembered the case referred to it as that strange one, but no one believed there was much left to find, until a small coincidence, and one persistent detective, changed everything. In 1979, Isaac Hansen was a newly appointed investigator with the Juneau County Sheriff's Department. Young, ambitious, and known for his unorthodox methods, he made it a personal mission to review unresolved cases from the past 2 decades. When he stumbled on the Audrey Backerberg file, something stuck with him. Why would a woman leave behind 4 children, but not take her last paycheck? Why would she vanish without a trace, but leave subtle signs that suggested movement? And why had no one ever followed up on the Greyhound station? Hansen reopened the case unofficially. He began re-interviewing witnesses, tracking down anyone still alive who had known Audrey, and scouring public records in surrounding states for any mention of a woman who resembled her, even under a new name. One by one, doors closed. But then, something strange. In an old DMV archive from Minnesota, Hansen found a license application from 1962. Under the name Marie Anders. The photo bore a resemblance to Audrey, thinner, older but similar features. The birth date was off by 1 year. He ran the name through a regional database. A match came up. A Marie Anders living in northern Minnesota had recently applied for a legal name change, something that flagged a public notice Hansen happened to be reviewing. Intrigued, He drove over 300 miles to follow the lead. What he found shocked him. The woman going by Marie was indeed Audrey Backeberg, alive, healthy, and stunned to find herself face to face with a police officer from her past. When Detective Isaac Hansen knocked on the faded blue door of a modest duplex in northern Minnesota, he didn't know what to expect. He had tracked down Marie Anders, based on little more than a hunch, a mismatched birth date, and an old photo that stirred something in his gut. But when the door opened, and he saw her face, he knew. He wasn't just staring at a missing person, he was staring at the ending, or perhaps, the beginning of a mystery that had haunted a family for nearly 2 decades. Audrey Marie Backeberg had disappeared from her life in Mouston, Wisconsin, on July 7th. By the fall of 1962, she was Marie Anders, living under a new identity, in a town more than 250 miles away. She rented a small room above a hardware store, and worked as a bookkeeper for a local grocer. She told no one about her past, not even the man she would eventually marry. When Detective Hansen asked her why she had vanished, abandoned her children, and allowed her family to think she might be dead, she didn't answer right away. Instead, she cried. She cried for 10 minutes before saying anything at all, and then she told him everything. Audrey had been planning her escape for over a year. She said it started the day Ronald punched her so hard she lost hearing in her right ear for 2 weeks. That's when she knew she had to get out, not just for herself, but because she feared what might happen to the kids next. But leaving in 1961 wasn't easy. There were no shelters for abused women, no hotline to call, and if a wife tried to take her children with her, she was often labeled unfit, hysterical, or even criminal. Audrey feared Ronald would track her down and harm them all if she tried, so she made the impossible choice to disappear and hope they would be safer without her. She staged the purse at the Greyhound station, left her car near her workplace, and hitchhiked north, with just $87 in her pocket and the clothes on her back. From that point on, she ceased to be Audrey. Her new life as Marie Anders was painstakingly constructed. She found work, paid cash for rent, and avoided any situation that required documentation. It took nearly a year for her to get a fake birth certificate from a sympathetic woman she met at a women's boarding house. Eventually, she secured a driver's license. With that, she could breathe again. She dyed her hair, wore glasses, and avoided cameras. Every day was a tightrope walk of fear and guilt. If anyone found her, she worried Ronald would come after her again. But even worse, she feared what her children would think of her. Would they hate her? Would they understand? She never stopped thinking about them. Every year on their birthdays, she would light a candle and whisper their names to herself. She wrote letters she never mailed, tucked photographs of their baby faces into the back of her drawer. She lived with the ache of knowing what she had given up, and the silence that followed. In 1965, Audrey met a man named Harold Peterson, a widower and part-time carpenter. He was quiet, gentle, and completely unlike Ronald. He never raised his voice, never raised a hand. He offered companionship, not control. They married in 1967. Audrey never told him her real name. Together they lived a quiet life. No children, no big move, just small-town rhythms, coffee in the morning, the evening news, and quiet dinners for two. To her neighbors, Marie Peterson was a kind but private woman. She volunteered at the library. She helped organize church potlucks. She was friendly but never close. There were no photos on the wall, no visitors from out of town, no past. Though she had escaped the violence, Audrey lived in a different kind of prison, one built from secrets and silence. She never contacted her children, not once. She said she convinced herself that knowing she was alive would only make their pain worse, that they had likely built a new life without her, and might resent her return. The guilt was so heavy that it became her reality. But there was another reason too. She feared Ron. Even 18 years later, the fear hadn't gone away. He had threatened to kill her if she ever left, and in her heart, she believed he would have made good on that promise. She didn't know if he was still alive. She had never tried to find out. She had buried her past so deep it took the knock of a determined detective to dig it up again. After learning the truth, Detective Hansen was faced with a choice. He could file charges against Audrey for abandoning her children, or he could help her reconnect with them. He chose the latter. The process was slow, delicate. He contacted Audrey's daughter first, now 21 and living in Milwaukee. When he told her that her mother was alive, there was silence on the other end of the line, then tears. Reunion wasn't easy. The children, now adults, had carried nearly 2 decades of pain, confusion, and abandonment. Meeting their mother again was like facing a ghost. Some of them were angry, others were just numb. But over time, tentative steps were taken. Phone calls turned into letters, letters turned into visits. They met in a church basement, all 5 of them, sitting in a circle, unsure where to begin. Audrey cried the entire time, so did her daughter. Her sons were less forgiving. One of them refused to speak to her. Another came only to ask a single question: "Why didn't you take us with you?" Audrey had no good answer, only a broken one. "I thought you'd be safer if you didn't know where I was." In the years that followed, Audrey slowly rebuilt relationships with some of her children. She remained estranged from others. She never moved back to Moston. The memories were too heavy. Instead, she continued her quiet life in Minnesota, this time no longer hiding. She filed to have her name legally restored, and in 1981, for the first time in 20 years, she signed her name Audrey Marie Backyberg. Her husband Harold stood by her. He told friends, "She's lived 2 lives, and I'm just lucky I got to be part of the second." The story made headlines briefly: "Mother missing for 18 years found alive in Minnesota," but it quickly faded again. Just another strange entry in the long list of true crime oddities, except for the family it left behind. For them, the silent years were never truly silent. They were filled with echoes of what could have been, of memories half-formed, of questions answered too late. In the end, Audrey Marie Backyberg didn't vanish without a trace. She just walked a road few understood, one paved with fear, survival, and unbearable choices. Her silence wasn't just a disappearance, it was a cry for freedom, in a world that offered none. In theory, a missing person case that resolves with a voluntary reappearance is closed. No crime, no charges. But Audrey's situation wasn't that simple. There were questions about parental abandonment, fraudulent identity, and possible obstruction. Some in the department argued she should be arrested. Others, including Hansen, believed she had suffered enough. She had survived domestic abuse, built a new life, and harmed no one in her second identity. Most importantly, she was ready to come forward on her terms. With Audrey's cooperation, Hansen arranged a controlled, confidential statement. She explained everything, from Ronald's violence to her calculated escape plan. She handed over the fake documents, gave consent to search her home, and allowed psychological evaluations. No charges were filed. Instead, Hansen made a controversial decision. He would focus the case, not on what Audrey did, but why she felt she had no choice. Word eventually leaked that Audrey Backyberg had been found alive. Local reporters descended on the sheriff's department, eager to sensationalize the story. Mother abandons family, found living in secret. But Hansen worked with Audrey to shape the narrative. A carefully worded press release was issued. Audrey Backyberg has been located safe and living under a new identity. She left voluntarily due to circumstances involving domestic abuse, which were not adequately addressed at the time of her disappearance. We ask the public to respect the privacy of all involved, as this case is brought to a close. It wasn't flashy, but it was honest. And it worked. Most headlines took a gentler tone. The community, once judgmental, grew curious, some even sympathetic. A few survivors of domestic abuse wrote letters to the department, thanking Audrey for her courage. The revival of the cold case didn't just close a file, it opened a conversation. Audrey's story had far-reaching consequences. First, it forced the sheriff's department to reevaluate dozens of older missing persons files, especially those involving women labeled voluntary walkaways. Second, it led to new policy. Starting in 1981, the Juneau County Sheriff's Department introduced mandatory follow-ups on all missing adult reports within 72 hours, regardless of the perceived circumstances. Third, Audrey's children, now adults, began advocating for better domestic violence protection. One became a counselor, another helped form a regional task force focused on missing women. What began as a silent trauma became a platform for change. And finally, for Hansen, the case changed his career. He was promoted to lieutenant, later assigned to a statewide cold case unit. He always said Audrey's case taught him the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the truth isn't buried in evidence, it's buried in silence. You just have to listen long enough to hear it. Audrey Backyberg's cold case was officially closed in March, but closure is a tricky word. For some of her children, the pain never fully healed. For others, reconciliation was possible, fragile, slow, but real. As for Audrey, she continued living in northern Minnesota, now under her birth name. She kept a photo of her children on the mantel, next to a candle she lit each year on July 7th, the day she disappeared, and the day her life truly began again. Some truths emerge, like a lightning strike, fast, jarring, undeniable. Others take years, decades even, to finally see the light. For Audrey's family, the truth wasn't a single moment, but a painful, layered unveiling. It didn't erase the past, it didn't undo the silence, but it offered something else: context, clarity, and for some, closure. It began with a box. Weeks after Audrey was found, one of her daughters, Janine, returned to the family home in Moston, a place she had avoided for years. The house, once their childhood shelter, now sat quiet and cold. Their father, Ronald, had passed away in 1973, a fact that brought mixed emotions. The home was being sold, and it fell to Janine to pack the remnants of a fractured history. In the attic, buried beneath broken furniture and yellowed newspapers, Janine found a shoebox. Inside were old receipts, a broken locket, and at the very bottom, a sealed envelope, addressed in Audrey's handwriting. It was dated July 5, 1961, 2 days before she vanished. The letter was never mailed. "My dear Janine, if you're reading this someday, it means everything changed. I want you to know first and always that I loved you, all of you, more than life itself. But love isn't always enough to keep you safe. I'm not strong like you'll think I should have been. Maybe you'll hate me for that. I can't blame you. I'm leaving because staying will kill me. Wish I could take you with me. But I know he'll never let me. He watches everything now. He reads the mail. He counts the groceries. He scares me more than you'll ever understand. I hope one day, when you're older, you'll look back and realize I didn't disappear out of selfishness. I disappeared because I was drowning. With all the love I can't show you now, Mama." The letter changed everything. It confirmed what Hansen had suspected, and what Audrey had feared. No one would believe that her disappearance was not abandonment, but survival. That behind the smiling family portraits and Sunday church appearances was a house steeped in fear. Janine brought the letter to Hansen, who asked permission to include it in the case file. She agreed, not because she wanted it public, but because she wanted it preserved. "My mother's truth should be remembered," she said, "not erased." The letter also opened the door to conversations long overdue. Siblings who hadn't spoken in years began to reconnect. Some shared memories of Ronald's temper, the broken plates, the slammed doors, the bruises explained away. Others admitted they had blocked it out, too young to understand or remember fully. But now, the pieces fit. In the weeks following her discovery, Audrey sat with a therapist, a social worker, and Detective Hansen to give a full documented account of her disappearance. It was a cathartic process, not just for her but for the record itself. She spoke in halting detail about the years of abuse, how it started with silence, then insults, then shoves, how Ronald would drink and become someone else entirely, how he forbade her from working, controlling every dollar and every decision. She recalled the night she decided to leave. Ronald had come home angry. A neighbor had seen Audrey talking to a male co-worker. Harmless small talk, but enough to set him off. He smashed her sewing machine, grabbed her by the hair, and threw her against the wall. That night, Audrey waited until he passed out. She packed a bag, wrote the letter, and made her plan. She would leave the car and her purse in public, a staged disappearance to make it seem like something sinister had happened. She hoped that would keep Ronald occupied, maybe even make him fear that someone else was looking for her. She bought a bus ticket to Duluth, Minnesota, under a fake name. She burned her birth certificate and never looked back. "I buried Audrey that night," she told the therapist, "but part of her never really died. She just stayed quiet for a long time." The children had been told different stories growing up. Ronald claimed Audrey had run off with another man. He said she was unstable, that she didn't love them. The children learned not to ask questions. But the discovery of the letter, and Audrey's full confession, shifted that narrative. It was emotionally chaotic. Janine felt relief. For years she had doubted her memories, the shouting, the slaps, the tears behind closed doors. Now she knew she hadn't imagined. Her younger brother Mark was angry, not just at Ronald, but at Audrey too. "Why didn't she come back for us when he died?" he asked. "Why didn't she try harder?" Audrey had no easy answer. "I didn't know he was dead," she said, voice trembling. "And I thought you'd hate me if I came back." In time they began attending therapy as a family. It wasn't smooth. There were walkouts, fights, long silences, but there was also progress. The truth didn't heal everything, but it stopped the bleeding. The press tried to sensationalize Audrey's story, interviews, tabloid headlines, even a TV movie pitch. But Audrey refused to participate. She didn't want to be a symbol, or a scandal, or a poster woman for missing mothers. She just wanted her children to know the truth. Still, the public response surprised everyone. Letters poured in, not of outrage, but of support. Women who had also fled abusive homes, grown children who had lived with buried family secrets. One woman wrote, "I was 12 when my mother vanished. I never knew." Reading about Audrey helped me understand that sometimes survival looks like selfishness from the outside. Thank you for sharing her story. In an unexpected twist, Audrey became a quiet icon of resilience, not because she wanted to, but because her truth echoed something universal: the human cost of silence. In 1985, Audrey passed away from complications related to lung cancer. Her funeral was small, just family, a few neighbors, and Detective Hansen, who delivered a short eulogy. "She taught me that some disappearances aren't about running away," he said. "They're about running towards something, even if you can't see it yet." Janine collected Audrey's letters and journals, and years later, helped publish a small book titled The Truth She Carried. It wasn't a bestseller, but it found a loyal readership among those who had lived similar stories. The book's final page quoted Audrey herself, from a note she left at the very end. "I never wanted to be remembered for how I left. I wanted to be remembered for what." When the truth about Audrey Millstone's disappearance was finally revealed, it didn't just impact her family. It rippled far beyond the people who had known her. The decades-old mystery had become a haunting tale etched into Boston's local folklore. Now, the real story peeled back a different layer, one that forced an entire town to reckon with the stories they told, the things they ignored, and the price of silence. The initial relief of learning Audrey hadn't been murdered quickly gave way to more complex emotions: guilt, confusion, and in some cases resentment. Her eldest daughter, Janine, became a fierce defender of her mother's legacy. She took comfort in knowing the truth, and found strength in understanding the woman she had barely known. Janine told anyone who would listen, "My mother didn't abandon us. She saved herself, and I only wish she could have saved us too." But not all the siblings agreed. Her younger brother Mark, raised almost entirely by Ronald, struggled deeply with the revelation. For years he had lionized their father, even after his death. He remembered a stern man, sure, but one who provided, protected, and preached respect. Learning that the man he idolized had driven their mother away shattered his worldview. Mark's reaction was rage, not only at Ronald, but at Audrey too. She left. That part doesn't change. Whether she had reasons or not, she disappeared. She let us believe she was dead. The family found themselves torn between empathy and bitterness. Holidays became battlegrounds. Conversations ended in silence. Therapy sessions helped, but reconciliation didn't come easily. Years of trauma had splintered them, and while the truth offered a compass, it didn't erase the scar. Boston, Wisconsin, population just under 5,000, had always whispered about the Millstone case. In the early 60s, neighbors speculated over Audrey's sudden disappearance. Rumors spread from the barbershop to the church pews: adultery, suicide, abduction. Theories multiplied in the absence of facts, each one more scandalous than the last. When the truth finally emerged in 1982, that Audrey had faked her disappearance to escape an abusive marriage, the town faced a collective reckoning. Some residents expressed support, even guilt. "I remember seeing bruises on her once," one woman admitted. "I asked if she was all right, and she laughed it off. I didn't push. I should have pushed." Others struggled with the implications. "She abandoned her kids," one man told the local paper. "I don't care what the reason was. A mother stays." The debate cut through generational lines. Younger residents, shaped by growing awareness of domestic abuse and women's rights, saw Audrey as courageous. Older generations, often taught to value family loyalty above all, viewed her actions as cowardly or disgraceful. The local paper ran a feature titled, "Audrey Millstone, Survivor or Sinner." It received more letters to the editor than any other article that year. Audrey's case didn't just stir emotions, it prompted change. Detective Hansen, who had shepherded the cold case to resolution, was invited to speak at several law enforcement seminars about the complexity of missing persons cases involving domestic abuse. His key message was sobering: Not all missing persons are victims of crime. Sometimes they are survivors of circumstances that gave them no safe exit. We need to stop treating runaway cases as moral failures and start seeing the red flag. The Wisconsin State Patrol quietly began revising internal protocols to include a domestic risk assessment in missing adult cases. This meant asking questions about the missing person's home life, financial dependence, and history of reported or unreported abuse. While no sweeping legislation followed Audrey's case directly, her story became part of police training casebooks across the Midwest, an example of why every disappearance deserves nuanced, trauma-informed investigation. National news outlets briefly picked up Audrey's story, drawn in by its eerie simplicity and emotional weight. For a few weeks in 1983, she was the subject of talk shows, op-eds, and a segment on 60 Minutes. But Audrey declined all interviews. Her children spoke sparingly. Janine agreed to one newspaper profile in which she stated, "This isn't a comeback story. My mother didn't escape to triumph. She escaped to survive. That should be enough." Still, the public responded in droves. Letters poured into the newspaper's editorial office. Survivors of domestic abuse who saw in Audrey a version of themselves. People who had fled in the dead of night with their children or alone, never able to return or explain. One woman wrote, "I walked out in 1975 and left my daughter behind. I was 17. I haven't spoken to her in 30 years. Audrey's story reminded me that survival sometimes requires sacrifice. It doesn't make us heartless, just human." Not all the letters were kind. Some accused Audrey of cowardice. Others accused the media of romanticizing abandonment. But the conversation sparked something crucial: awareness. Civic groups began organizing workshops on recognizing signs of domestic abuse. Churches offered counseling, and in Boston, a women's shelter that had long struggled with funding found new donors, inspired by the case's visibility. The truth cost Audrey greatly emotionally, spiritually, and socially. Even in her final years, she remained largely reclusive. She did not attempt to rejoin her family in any traditional sense. Rebuilding those relationships took time, and even then they remained fractured. She never remarried. She never left Wisconsin again. "I spent my whole life running," she once told her therapist. "I don't want to spend the rest pretending to be someone I'm not." She passed away quietly, with Janine by her side. At the funeral, Janine placed a copy of the original letter, the one Audrey had written in 1960. "I wanted her to go with her own words," Janine said, "not the stories that were told about her." Years later, a graduate student from the University of Wisconsin wrote her thesis on the Audrey Millstone case, calling it "The Cost of Silence." She wrote, "Audrey didn't change the world, but she showed us what happens when a woman's voice is taken, and what it means to take it back. Her disappearance wasn't the crime, the silence afterward was." The paper is now taught in some sociology and criminology classes across the Midwest. The story has faded from headlines but lingers in lecture halls and community centers, a quiet, painful, powerful legacy. Truth doesn't always arrive wrapped in resolution. Sometimes it lands in fragments, in letters never sent, memories long buried, and wounds still raw. But even fractured truths carry weight, and sometimes they set us free. The story of Audrey Millstone is many things: a mystery, a tragedy, a testament to survival. But at its heart, it's a mirror that reflects deeper truths about family, silence, trauma, and the way society chooses to remember the vanished. From the outside, the Millstones looked like a model mid-century American family: modest house, well-mowed lawn, children in Sunday clothes. But what lay behind that front door was a different world: fear, coercion, isolation. Audrey's disappearance exposes one of the most enduring illusions of the 20th century: the belief that abuse only happens in broken homes, to other people, or to those already on the margin. The truth is, violence, particularly domestic violence, often wears a mask. It dresses up in smiles at church, barbecues with neighbors, polite handshakes at PTA meetings. Ronald Millstone wasn't a monster in the eyes of most. He was a respected man, hard-working, quiet, stern. That very normalcy is what allowed the abuse to remain hidden. The Millstone home was a textbook case of what psychologists now refer to as coercive control, a form of domestic abuse marked not only by physical harm, but by emotional domination, isolation from friends, control over finances, intimidation through silence, threats disguised as concern. Audrey's story reminds us that harm doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers behind closed doors. Silence pervades this story, not just from Audrey, but from the community, law enforcement, and even her children. That silence wasn't always malicious. Sometimes it was born of confusion, denial, fear, or the learned habit of minding one's business. For years, neighbors ignored the signs. Some didn't know what to look for. Others didn't want to act. Law enforcement, constrained by the gender norms and investigative limitations of the era, treated Audrey's disappearance as a mystery, but not a priority. She was an adult. She was presumed to have left. No one asked why a mother of 4 would simply vanish in the night, with no history of instability, no suicide note, no clear motive. The lack of urgency in Audrey's case is emblematic of a broader cultural tendency, especially at the time, to downplay missing adult women, particularly wives and mothers. There was often an unspoken assumption: if she left, she must have had her reasons, or worse, deserved what happened. Audrey's story is a painful reminder of what's lost when we don't listen. Not just lives, but chances to intervene, to offer help, to ask the hard questions before it's too late. Perhaps the most difficult question in Audrey's story is also the most human. Can someone be both a survivor and an abandoner? Audrey left her children behind, 4 of them. The pain that choice caused them is undeniable. For decades they lived with the ghost of a mother they thought had been taken, murdered, or worse, who simply didn't care. But her choice wasn't simple. She fled an impossible situation, one that offered no clean exit, no safety net. Women of her era had few resources. Divorce was shameful, and courts overwhelmingly sided with fathers. Shelters were rare. Job prospects for single women with children were scarce and unstable. Audrey didn't leave because she didn't love her children. She left because she didn't see a path where she could save herself and them at the same time. That doesn't undo the hurt, but it complicates it, in the way that truth often does. Survivors of abuse often face impossible decisions. They are forced to weigh survival against societal expectation, safety against sacrifice. Audrey's choice challenges us to reframe the way we judge women who leave, who disappear, who choose self-preservation when the world offers them no grace. Time is its own character in Audrey's story. It stretches, erodes, distorts. For 20 years people remembered her as a ghost, a woman who vanished, a puzzle to be solved. But memories aren't fixed. They change with age, with context, with revelation. When the truth surfaced, people were forced to revise their memories of Audrey: the smiling housewife, the distant neighbor, the presumed victim, the runaway, the survivor. That evolution reflects a broader truth about history and memory. We often don't understand people until long after they've gone, and even then, our understanding is shaped as much by who we are as by who they were. In the end, Audrey's legacy isn't just what happened in her life, it's how we choose to remember her. If there is redemption in this story, it comes not from happy endings. There are few, but from awareness. Today there are hotlines, shelters, advocacy groups, trauma-informed officers. The landscape isn't perfect, but it's better. In part because stories like Audrey's made it clear what happens when those systems don't exist. Her case has become a quiet catalyst. It has appeared in academic journals, in training seminars for social workers and police, in group therapy circles where survivors trade stories like lifeline. In that sense, Audrey left behind more than mystery. She left behind a lesson that silence isn't safety, and that listening, truly listening, can be the first act of rescue.
Audrey Millstone didn't change history. She didn't lead movements, win lawsuits, or write books. She disappeared. She ran. She endured. And that endurance, painful, private, and imperfect, became its own kind of revolution. 18 years. That's how long a single unanswered question hovered in silence, shaping lives from the shadows. In the end, it wasn't just about a mother who disappeared, or a daughter left behind. It was about the fracture in trust, the quiet resilience of memory, and the unrelenting pursuit of truth. This story, like many others buried in the cold archives of missing persons cases, reminds us that silence can speak volumes, and the past has a way of demanding answers, no matter how many years go by. As we've seen, the truth doesn't always arrive wrapped in clarity. Sometimes it shows up in fragments: a phone call, a forgotten diary, a changed name. But every clue matters,
And every voice that refuses to forget becomes part of a larger force pushing toward justice. For the families left behind, closure is never just a word. It's a need, a basic human longing to know what really happened, to make sense of absence, and to rewrite the story with an ending, no matter how painful. So what can we take from this? If anything, it's the importance of persistence, whether it's law enforcement revisiting old case files, journalists shedding light on forgotten names, or a daughter refusing to accept silence. Progress is possible. There's still hope in reopening cold cases. There's still power in telling these stories. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever heard of a case that took decades to solve, or one that still lingers in the dark? Maybe you or someone you know has lived with unanswered questions for years. Drop your thoughts, theories, or personal stories in the comments below. You never know who might read it, and what piece of the puzzle it could unlock. If this story gripped you, consider watching our other video, The Horrifying Secrets Beneath a Mother's Home. It dives into another real-life mystery where hidden truths finally surfaced and left an unforgettable impact. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on the next chilling tale of secrets, lies, and long-awaited justice. Because here, every story matters.